All right, let's do the history. After returning from exile, the people of Israel lived under Persian rule for 200 years. That's what we've been doing the last 3 weeks. And as far as being a conquered nation goes, it wasn't too bad. We've seen how the Persian kings really helped the Jewish people out, allowed them to return home, allowed them to rebuild the temple, allowed them to rebuild the walls. The Jews still had to pay their tribute to the Persian king. They had a royal governor. They weren't free, but in local matters, they were often allowed to govern themselves. Since there was no king, after Zerubbabel, the Davidic line becomes obscure. So the high priest becomes the de facto ruler of the people. Ruled by high priest, and then above that, ruled by Persia. Then, fast forward 100 years after Nehemiah, in 332 BC, Alexander the Great comes along. He conquers the known world, and the Jews welcome him in. Not that they had much choice in the matter. The story of Alexander coming to Jerusalem is kind of fun, though. Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, writes, Alexander the Great gave his hand to the high priest, and with the Jews running along beside him, entered the city. Then Alexander went up to the temple, where he sacrificed to God under the direction of the high priest, and showed due honor to the priests and to the high priest himself. And then the priest showed him the book of Daniel, and declared to him that he was the belly of bronze, and that the prophets had foretold his coming, and that he would destroy the empire of the Persians. He was pretty happy about this. And he came back the next day and gave gifts to all of them before moving on. So he was pretty happy with his reception by the Jews. Then Alexander died young just 9 years later. His kingdom was split up among his generals. The two kingdoms that concern us are those of Seleucus and Ptolemy. Take out your maps. The Ptolemaic Empire is in pink. That's Egypt. The Seleucid Empire is in green. That's Syria and Babylon, and into Asia Minor. Little history behind that, because it's kind of interesting. You got the two generals, Seleucus and Ptolemy. Seleucus founded the city of Seleucia, right there north of Babylon, and he meant for that to be his capital city. But soon after that, he moved west because the power centers of the world were moving west. You've got the rise of Rome. You've got the rise of Greece. He moved west and founded the city of Antioch, right there in Syria, near the coast. And he named Antioch after his father and his son, both of whom were named Antioch, or Antiochus. And most of the kings that come after him are named Antiochus. The evil king that persecutes Judas Maccabeus is Antiochus IV. The Seleucid kingdom, this green kingdom here, lasts for nearly 300 years until it is finally conquered by the Romans. Now, let's look at Ptolemy. Ptolemy goes down to Alexandria and founds the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. His capital in Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great. I didn't bother to give you a family tree for the Ptolemies. I've actually got a family tree for Seleucus, but no need to give you a family tree for the Ptolemies. All the kings are named Ptolemy. And most of the queens are named Cleopatra, although a few of them are named Bernice. How did this work? How did they get such uniformity of names? Because it was customary for the Egyptian kings to marry their own sisters. They're infamous for being about the most inbred dynasty in history. Despite this, they last for about 300 years until Mark Antony and Julius Caesar get the best of Cleopatra.
Which one?
The seventh. So there's your Ptolemaic Empire. They start not doing so well after a while. Here it says it's 240 BC. You'll notice the Ptolemies control Israel. You'll notice, too, that Israel is right in between the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires. It's right on the border. It's a battlefield. Starts out under the rule of the Ptolemies, mostly. And in 201 BC, it goes under the control of the Seleucids, mostly. It's forever being fought over. Here's a total tangent. We talked about the two capital cities of these empires, Antioch and Alexandria. They become famous centers of Greek power, learning, and culture. What they're going to be, though, are the great centers of Christian theology in the early church. In the first 2 centuries of the church, we're talking 100 to 700 AD, so many bishops and theologians come from Antioch and Alexandria, or go to Antioch and Alexandria to get educated. Antioch is famous for their literal interpretation of Scripture. Alexandria is famous for their allegorical interpretation of Scripture. These start out as evil pagan cultural centers, and they become great centers of Christian theology and culture. God works in mysterious ways. He knew what he was doing, and he raised up these cities. You can kind of look through the Seleucid dynasty handout, and I just named a few. We've got Seleucus I, Alexander the Great's general, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the bad guy. And now let's take a look at the other family tree, the Hasmonean dynasty. What is the Hasmonean dynasty? That's the Maccabee family. Why did they call themselves the Hasmonean dynasty? Because the founder, Mattathias, major character in First Maccabees, his father's name was Hasmoneus. So the dynasty gets named after Mattathias' father. It's a pretty good map of the Maccabee family here if you take a look at it. Mattathias is on top, and then he's got his 5 sons, John Gaddi, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. 3 of them are leaders of Israel at some point. Judas, Jonathan, and Simon in that order. After that, rule goes to Simon's son, John Hyrcanus, and so on and so forth. What's interesting is if you look at the very bottom, who do you have there? Herod. Herod's not descended from the Maccabees. Herod's an Edomite. He's a descendant of Esau. He's one of his tribe's a traditional enemy of Israel. But in the time of, I believe, John Hyrcanus, Judea conquered the Edomites and forced them to convert to Judaism. So now they're part of the empire. When the Romans come in, they appoint Herod king of Judea. The Jews are not thrilled about this because Herod's not really one of them. He's technically converted to Judaism, like all of his people, but they don't think it's a sincere conversion. And by the way he lives, they're right. Herod marries into the Maccabee family. His second wife here is Mariamne I, which is a fancy Greek way of saying Miriam, or Mary. That was his second wife, and I believe he brutally executes her. He goes through more wives than Henry VIII that way. So he's connected to the Maccabees by marriage. But the Maccabees by that point have become corrupt and power hungry. It's the earlier ones that are heroic. And one more thing, the small map on top here shows the land ruled by the Maccabees. How in the beginning, they've got just a little pink area around Jerusalem. Then under Judas and his brothers, they get the orange area. Then under John Hyrcanus and the king after him, Aristobulus, I believe his name is, they conquer Samaria, Galilee, Gilead, the Philistines, the Edomites, and you get a kingdom almost as big as the kingdom of David's back in the day. So for a brief, impressive time, they were independent and ruled the surrounding nations again. Like 100 years or so, yep. And then the Romans come in and crush them. The Romans. All right, there's all your background history and all your handouts. Any questions? Very good point. I mean, these 2 empires that keep fighting over Israel, yeah, they're technically Syria and Egypt, right? Why do we say they're Greek empires? They're run by the Greeks. The rulers are Greeks. They're descendants of Alexander the Great's generals. They are Greek culturally, in language, in their thinking, in their education. They're Greeks. Both of these empires are run by Greek elites. All right. Everyone understands the history now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Your brain is full for the night already, huh? But think about it. You just learned about 500 years of history right here. In about 31 minutes. That's impressive. Now, when this part of history gets referenced for the rest of your life, you'll be like, oh yes, the Seleucid Empire. I remember them.